Elias Rayner had always known that moving into Willow Estates came with strings attached. The manicured lawns, the pastel-colored townhomes, the weekly potlucks where everyone pretended to love tuna casserole that was all too perfect, and he hated perfect. He'd only agreed to the move because the property backed onto an aquifer he'd mapped a decade ago during his years as a hydro engineer. It was a rare slice of independence in a world dominated by municipal monopolies. So, Elias drilled his private well quietly, efficiently, and entirely within legal bounds, or so he thought. The notice came on a Tuesday, a Paliello slip, sealed with the hack's gilded watermark, tucked neatly under his windshield wiper. It read like a royal decree, complete with passive-aggressive language and thinly veiled threats. Your unauthorized water extraction system does not conform with Willow Estates' aesthetic integrity guidelines. You are hereby instructed to remove the offending structure within 72 hours. Elias laughed when he read it. They couldn't be serious, but the HOA was always serious. On Friday morning, Elias woke to the unmistakable roar of machinery. Peeking out his kitchen window, coffee in hand, he watched as a crew in neon vests rolled a concrete mixer onto his property. He burst out the front door, shouting. No one looked up. A clipboard-toting man nodded to a backhoe operator who promptly tore the well cap from the ground like a cork from a bottle. Elias sprinted barefoot across his lawn, yelling louder this time, but it was too late. Concrete gushed from the mixer, a thick gray slurry swallowing the well like lava. The crew packed up without a word. By the time Elias reached the site, his lifeline to the aquifer was gone, buried under 3 feet of bureaucratic spite. Furious, Elias stormed into the HOA office that afternoon. The receptionist, a glassy-eyed woman with HOA logo earrings, they've barely looked up. You'll need to make an appointment, she said. President Crane is booked through next Thursday. Elias demanded to speak with her anyway, but 2 polite security officers appeared from nowhere and escorted him outside, like he was a drunk wedding guest. He stood in the parking lot, blinking under the late afternoon sun. Concrete dust clung to his sandals. For a long moment he said nothing, then he smiled. People in Willow Estates forgot that Elias wasn't just a retired engineer. He'd worked on urban hydrodynamics for over 20 years. He'd once reversed a corrupt desalination project in the Sahara. He knew the city's water grid like an architect knew blueprints and, more importantly, he knew its vulnerabilities. Water was a game of pressure, direction, and flow. And what had the HOA done? They had challenged a man who lived and breathed fluid systems. By nightfall, Elias was in his basement, flipping switches, brushing dust off circuit boards, and booting up machines he hadn't touched in years. He opened the terminal on his aging Hydronet server. The console blinked to life, humming with potential. He still had access to his old network credentials buried in the backbone of the city's digital water infrastructure, mostly forgotten, never revoked. Municipal oversight was always good at building systems, but terrible at cleaning them up. He pulled out a dusty notebook labeled Flow Subversion Tactics and flipped to a page marked with a paperclip. Diagrams, access codes, pressure nodes, still valid. With the HOA's water supply running directly through one of the city's older trunk lines, it wouldn't take much to reroute, restrict, or even freeze their access completely. Not forever, of course. Just long enough. Long enough to make them feel what it was like to have something essential ripped away with no warning. Long enough to understand that water, like respect, flows both ways and could dry up just as fast. The basement laboratory beneath Elias Rayner's home hadn't seen true activity in years. Dust coated the steel surfaces like ash from a long-dead volcano. Shelves bowed under the weight of technical manuals, and wires hung from the ceiling entangled. Loops like vines in a forgotten jungle. But Elias moved with purpose, sweeping aside the clutter, reconnecting cables with a mechanical precision that only obsession or rage could sustain. His primary workstation flickered to life. The blue hue of his multi-screen array cast sharp shadows across the room. On one screen, the City Water Authority's main infrastructure map. On another, the HOA's approved water grid schematic. Downloaded from an old Willow Estates promotional PDF, overlaying them revealed a critical point of convergence node 7B. An outdated but still functional routing valve beneath the central pump house 3 blocks from Elias's home. It was vulnerable, and it was his key. As a former senior systems engineer for Aquanet Technologies, Elias had once helped design the municipal water regulation AI that balanced distribution across 10 square miles. It was never intended to be tampered with, but no one knew its weaknesses better than him. He hadn't just built the system, he'd buried backdoors inside it. Hidden command strings only accessible through sequences that mimicked water pressure. Fluctuations commands no outsider would ever guess, but he wasn't an outsider. He retrieved a small, thumb-sized device from a locked drawer. The hydro override beacon, or hub. It looked innocuous, like a USB stick with a copper spiral etched into its side, but it could broadcast encrypted commands directly into the buried infrastructure via high-frequency vibration, essentially tricking the system into thinking it was receiving physical input from analog regulators. He'd only used it once before during a test run in a conflict zone, overseas. Now it was personal. Before deploying the hob, Elias ran simulations. He called the program Water Knot. Every possible failure scenario was tested: overflow, back pressure, emergency routing. He didn't want to break the city's water grid, just the HOA's portion. Isolate them like a dry leaf in a stream. After 36 hours of continuous calibration, the results came back. The system worked. He could simulate a contamination warning in Node 7B, triggering an auto-freeze on all downstream residential connections flagged under Willow Estates zip code. No alarm bells at the city level, just a temporary safety shutdown with an automated review time of 14 days. It was elegant, almost poetic. Still, he needed more than just technical leverage. The HOA was infamously stubborn, and its president, Beverly Crane, had once sued a neighbor for planting a Japanese maple 3 inches too close to her fence. Elias needed to control the narrative, plant doubt in their ranks, soften their foundation before the pressure hit. He opened an anonymous community forum account. Aqua Weasley 47's first post. Anyone else notice weird chlorine spikes this week? My plants are dying and my skin burns after showers. Something's not right. Within hours, others chimed in. Yeah, my water smells off too, someone replied. Could it be from the new landscaping treatments? Elias fanned the flames carefully, introducing words like contamination, pipeline corrosion, and waterborne illness. He linked articles, some real, some doctored. The HOA's own members began asking questions, emailing the board, demanding answers. By Friday, Beverly Crane had issued a community-wide email stating all water readings have been confirmed. Within normal parameters, there is no cause for concern. The perfect denial. Elias smiled. He waited until 2:43 a.m., the dead hour, when no one watered lawns or flushed toilets. He drove out quietly, parked beside the pump house under cover of dark, and planted the hydro override beacon near the base, camouflaged under gravel and ivy. Back in his lab, he watched the signal light flick from red to green. He clicked activate, freeze protocol alpha. Nothing changed immediately. No alarms sounded, but below the surface, valves were locking, digital flags were being tripped, and pressure was quietly being rerouted. The system accepted the false contamination alert as real and responded, accordingly sealing off water to every pipe feeding Willow Estates. They wouldn't know it until morning, and when they did, Elias would be waiting. Dawn broke with the promise of a warm, sunny Saturday, perfect weather for power washing driveways and overwatering hydrangeas. But in Willow Estates, the usual chorus of sprinkler heads clicking to life was absent. There were no children shrieking from the mist of backyard hoses, no gentle hum of lawn irrigation. Instead, there was confusion. In one home, a father twisted the kitchen faucet handle, only to be greeted by a hollow gurgle and a final spit of air. In another, a woman clutched her coffee pot, staring into its empty reservoir like it had betrayed her. Toilets refused to flush. Ice makers clicked in vain. Even the most pampered smart showers, complete with LED aromatherapy lights and customizable rainfall pressure, stayed stubbornly dried out by 7:15 a.m. Beverly Crane was already on her third complaint call. She sat in her office, surrounded by framed certificates of neighborhood excellence and community unity leadership, furiously redialing the city utilities department while toggling through neighborhood group chats that were rapidly devolving into panic. Elias watched it all unfold from the comfort of his basement command center, through a private surveillance feed pieced together from hacked doorbell cams and community-wide security nodes. He observed the HOA's confusion grow into disarray. People gathered in driveways, clutching empty water bottles and theorizing wildly. A few accused the city of rationing, others blamed recent sewer maintenance. No one suspected sabotage. Not yet. Elias sipped coffee and leaned back in his chair. Everything was proceeding with surgical precision. Freeze Protocol Alpha hadn't just cut off W. He wasn't cruel. He left the school and the community medical center untouched. Those were tied to separate nodes. Children would drink, emergencies would be handled. But lawns, water features, spa tubs and pet fountains, those were luxuries, and luxuries could be sacrificed for a lesson in humility. That evening, as the HOA filed another complaint with the city, Elias pulled up his command window. The system status read, Willow Estates node, sealed, estimated reactivation 13 days, 11 hours. He smiled, then typed a single line into the terminal. Drip by drip, you learn respect. And then he powered down the screen. The HOA's clubhouse, typically used for wine tastings and heated debates about hedge heights, had become a war room. The long faux mahogany table was cluttered with printouts, laptops, and half-drunk bottles of sparkling water imported from Beverly Crane's private stash. The air was thick with tension, and the faint smell of panic sweat masked in citrus-scented room spray. No one was smiling. Beverly stood at the head of the table, flanked by a whiteboard labeled Possibly Perpetrators. Only one name was written on it, Elias Rayner. We can't prove anything yet, she said, clicking her pen like a metronome. But I don't need proof, I need motive. And I think we all know who's had one for months. Gerald, ever the voice of reason and weakness, scratched his bald head and mumbled, "But wouldn't tampering with municipal infrastructure be a federal crime?" Beverly whirled on him. "So is destroying HOA-authorized landscaping." "But we all saw what he did to his lawn." Gasps echoed. "He ripped out the St. Augustine turf, and the community standard concrete pavers, replaced it with drought-tolerant wildflowers." Wildflowers. Marcia, the secretary, clutched her pearls. "My God, the bees." The board murmured in agreement. To them, this wasn't just about water. This was about control, about defiance. Elias had resisted everything the HOA stood for: uniformity, compliance, suburban utopia. And now, with every facet in the neighborhood bone dry, his rebellion had graduated from nuisance to sabotage. But what they didn't know was that Elias had infiltrated their panic room. In his basement, Elias had tuned in to their emergency, a session via a hijacked smart speaker hidden in a potted fern near the coffee station. He listened calmly as they speculated wildly. The more they grasped at straws, the more confident he felt. He didn't need to hide forever. He just needed to control the narrative long enough to force their hand. That night, he deployed his next move: psychological disruption. He created a fake email account under the alias drytruth@protonmail.com and sent an anonymous message to every resident in Willow Estates. Subject: "What they're not telling you to your neighbors. The truth is being hidden. The water issue isn't a city mistake. It's the result of tampering by someone inside our very own HOA. Someone with access, someone who wanted to punish us for asking questions. Look closely, follow the money, and ask yourself who benefits when we go dry." A friend. By sunrise, chaos had metastasized. The community chat exploded. Theories ranged from corporate conspiracy to insider embezzlement. Some believed Beverly was diverting water to her greenhouse. Others accused Gerald of funneling funds into offshore bottled water futures. Paranoia spread like wildfire. Front lawns began to brown as people filled buckets from gym showers and trucked in bottled water by the crate. Residents began knocking on each other's doors, demanding explanations. At least 2 lawn duels erupted over accusations of illegal siphoning. Elias added fuel to the fire with one simple act. He printed out a fake water bill labeled Willow Estates infrastructure fee $13,700 pending, and left it taped to the HOA office door. The fine print read, "Backdated for unauthorized aquifer interference." The implication was subtle but powerful. Someone had crossed the line, and now the whole neighborhood was footing the bill. Inside the clubhouse, Beverly sat alone, rubbing her temples. "We need a scapegoat," she whispered. Gerald poked his head in. "The city said their investigation won't finish for another week, and we've had 7 residents threaten to sue for emotional water trauma. What do we do?" Beverly stood up slowly. "We do what the HOA does best," she said. "We draft a new rule." And just like that, a resolution was drafted. Any resident found responsible for unauthorized plumbing, irrigation, or digital interference would face permanent expulsion from Willow Estates. But Elias had already anticipated this. He had copies of the HOA's bylaws, dozens of contradictions, outdated clauses, and unenforceable rulings. He'd already submitted an anonymous complaint to the city citing HOA mismanagement and property rights violations. The legal dominoes were lined up now. He just needed to knock them over. The courtroom was nothing like the pristine showrooms of Willow Estates. No marble countertops, no white picket fences, no curated rows of ornamental tulips, just aged wood, buzzing fluorescents, and the low hum of tension crackling through the air. A half-dozen residents had gathered in the gallery, whispering behind cupped hands. At the plaintiff's table sat Beverly Crane, wrapped in a navy blue blazer as rigid as her posture, her mouth drawn into a line so tight it could slice paper. Beside her sat a legal team hired by the HOA's emergency fund, flipping through binders full of bylaws, screenshots, and, most importantly, assumptions. Across the aisle, Elias Rayner sat alone. No lawyer, no entourage, just him, his brown hoodie, and a black aluminum briefcase filled not with opinions, but with evidence. He looked calm, even faintly amused, as if this was a formal meeting over tea and not the culmination of a suburban Cold War. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman named Honorable Marla Kent, adjusted her glasses and tapped her gavel. "Let's begin." Beverly's lawyer launched into an eloquent tirade about property damage, community disruption, and a campaign of digital terrorism orchestrated by a disgruntled homeowner with a vendetta against order. She described Elias's private well as an illegal installation, the sabotage of water lines as eco-extremism, and the anonymous emails as deliberate psychological warfare. The word hostile appeared at least 8 times. Judge Kent turned to Elias. "Your response, Mr. Rayner." Elias stood, opened his briefcase, and pulled out a thick folder stamped with a blue city emblem. "I'd like to enter these into evidence," he said. "Official correspondence from the Municipal Water Authority verifying that my well was drilled under a now expired but valid independent water extraction permit, issued prior to Willow Estates' annexation into city jurisdiction." Beverly's eyes widened just slightly. The room stilled. Elias continued, flipping to the next document. "This," he said, "is a time-stamped photo of my well before it was destroyed, and this is a satellite image from a drone I deployed that same morning, clearly showing HOA contractors trespassing on my property without legal notice or municipal order." He laid out every detail like a mosaic: permits, timestamps, municipal records, even voice recordings of the HOA's foreman muttering about getting this over with before anyone asks too many questions. The piece de resistance was a notarized letter from a retired city planner confirming that the HOA's unilateral decision to fill a private well without confirming jurisdiction constituted unlawful destruction of essential property. Judge Kent raised an eyebrow. "And the water disruption, Mr. Rayner?" Elias offered a small, almost apologetic shrug. "The city's water AI entered a standard contamination protection mode due to pressure fluctuations in a legacy pipeline. I did report that anomaly to the city, anonymously of course. It's not my fault if their protocols overcorrected a pause, but I can confirm the system functioned precisely as designed." Silence followed. Then a slow intake of breath from the gallery. The judge leaned back. "It appears, Miss Crane, that not only did your HOA act outside its authority, but it also created the conditions for its own downfall." She tapped her gavel once, sharply. "This court finds in favor of Mr. Rayner." The room broke into murmurs as Beverly turned pale. Judge Kent continued, addressing the courtroom. "Effective immediately. The HOA will restore Mr. Rayner's property access, compensate him for the destruction of his well, and given his expertise and the negligent actions of this board, Mr. Rayner is hereby appointed as a municipal consultant to oversee Willow Estate's water infrastructure until the city review is complete." Elias blinked. "You want me in charge of their water?" Judge Kent smiled faintly. "You already were. Now it's just official." The news spread through Willow Estates like a flood. By week's end, residents were calling Elias the water warden. He didn't install fences or issue fines. He installed new filtration units, optimized irrigation flow, and rewrote HOA water guidelines with scientific precision and a sense of poetic justice. And while the fountains flowed once more and lawns regained their green, one thing was clear. In Willow Estates, respect was now measured in gallons, and Elias controlled the tap.